Welcome to Work Ready, What's New with Resumes. I am so pleased that you are joining us on this evening, that you're choosing to spend the evening with us learning about resumes. I truly appreciate it. The Work Ready program started in December of last year and will continue through December of this year. And it's three different things, all there to assist people who are either looking for jobs or trying to improve your work situation. So either you're trying to get a promotion, a raise, or discover how to make a career pivot to a more sustainable career. We're doing it in three ways. The first is we're battling the digital divide by lending out laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots out of 20 library locations. And you can register for those laptops. You still have a week to register, and the registration form is right on the Work Ready page, which Anna Sylvia will post in the chat. The second is this very thing. So we have 6 sessions that are happening throughout this year as part of Work Ready. This is the second session, and this is the second program of the second session. Live events during every week of the session and posting videos on our YouTube channel. And the third aspect of Work Ready is books. We're the library. We've got books, and we're purchasing the latest and greatest career-related books and ebooks for you. So whether it's exam prep or career pivots, interviews, cover letters, resumes, any career-related topic that you might be interested in, we're trying to get you books about that. So if you want the physical book, go to our website, place it on hold, have it sent to one of our 80 sidewalk service locations. And if you want a book immediately, there is actually a list on Overdrive, which is our ebook platform, of work-ready titles that you can get right away without even leaving your chair. All right. Well, that's enough about Work Ready. And I would like to introduce our presenter for the evening. She's a longtime career coach and a frequent library presenter. We're very pleased to have her back for this session of Work Ready to talk about what's new with resumes. Further ado, Liz Mohler.
Thank you, Oleg. I'm so glad to be here. I am actually not here in Los Angeles, where I usually am. I'm currently in Madison, Wisconsin, and it's a little bit colder. And if it wasn't so dark out, you would see snow on the ground, because that's what happens in Madison, Wisconsin in the wintertime. But this is a wonderful opportunity for me to connect with everybody out there in wherever you are. And in the future, you'll possibly be catching me on YouTube. So that will be a lot of fun. And I've put in the chat a link to a Google survey. So after this program, if you want more details or more information, you can fill out that Google survey and give me your contact information, and I will absolutely follow up with you, because I love to reach out and help people in their career searches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a little bit of an outline for today. We are going to go ahead and talk about the world of work, and specifically resumes. And many of you might have already seen my presentation somewhere, but for those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Liz Mohler, and I'm a career coach. And my goal is to help you realize your potential, visualize your goals, and actualize your dreams. So who am I? Well, I'm actually originally from Madison, Wisconsin. I went to school there and then went to graduate school in Arizona. I've got 2 kids that are, one's a UCLA graduate and one is a Boston University senior. And I've got my certificate as a life coach, but I've been career coaching for over 20 years. I've worked with the libraries for over 10 years because I love to give back to the community. And I think all of you are so smart to tap into these resources, because the libraries are a fantastic wealth of information. And although we can't gather physically, we can all gather online and digitally embrace what the libraries have to offer. So I really want to thank Oleg and his team and Anna Sylvia for pulling this together and inviting me to speak to all of you. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what's new with resumes. I'll cover a little bit of the myths that are out there, quickly go through some three common resume types, and then kind of break down the sections. And hopefully you guys all have a pad of paper and a pencil so that you can make this a little bit interactive and maybe take notes as I'm speaking on tips and suggestions that you might want to change or update on sections of your resume. And then as a recap, I'll try to cover some resume mistakes. And then I'm going to definitely take a few minutes to talk a little bit about what to do if you've got a gap in your resume. You were not working, you were home, you were at school, whatever might have caused a gap. And for all of us, COVID is possibly one big gap. If you've been furloughed or laid off or let go from where you currently were working, many of the people that I coach in the hospitality business are going to have a gap in their resume. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Career Coaching 2021 and things like the ATS, the applicant tracking systems, and what's the technology that's changed about the world of work and specifically resumes. And we're going to get into a little bit about why resumes are still important, even though on the one hand, I like to tell clients that resumes are almost obsolete because of this amazing online tool that we have called LinkedIn. So we'll discuss that a little bit as well. So to get us started, one of the biggest myths that I hear a lot of clients say is, I need a resume because that's what I need to get the job. And in reality, what resumes will do is creating a resume will help you focus. And when you're focused and you're going through the resume of your life, it's going to boost your confidence. So a lot of times when I'm working with clients, phase one of the career search process is helping my clients figure out who they are by asking them where they've been, what they've done, and what's on their resume. And I frequently will walk through a resume with a client and really sort of engage with them about all their accomplishments they've already had. The other thing about the resume is that it's the tool to attract attention. It's what you put out as sort of a marketing piece. But in reality, the objective of a resume is to get you an interview, not the job, but the interview. So when we think about resumes, a lot of times people say to me, well, I know that the resume should just be one page. I should put everything I've ever done onto one page and put it in tiny, tiny font. And the reality is it could be 2 pages or more. The rule of thumb is that we want the resume to look good, so we never want to leave a lot of white space, like a half a page. If you're at a 1.5 page resume, go ahead and find some more information to make it a 2-page, or go ahead and whittle it down to 1 page. But that's a myth that the resume only should be 1 page. The other thing that I like to say is that there are some basic resume formats and some basic do's and don'ts about the resume. So some of the basic formats are really simple. There's the chronological, which means that you put everything in data order and you start with things that are the most recent. So if you're a recent college grad, you might put education at the top of a chronological resume. And you always want to put your most recent work experience and then go backwards. And you really don't want to go back chronologically more than about 10 years. Because even if you were working, say, in an office 10 years ago, if you were working in an office more than 10 years ago, you might have been working with Rolodexes or fax machines, and those are now obsolete. So those experiences and that knowledge may be out of date. So in choosing the type of resume that's a chronological resume, you're going to put dates, and I like to put dates flush on the right-hand side, and I like them to be consistent, whether you're doing just the years or whether you're a recent college graduate and you want to put in maybe summer jobs and you're going to add some months. But a chronological resume is exactly that. It's your historical view of where you've worked. The functional resume, on the other hand, highlights qualifications and skills at the top, and it kind of highlights the functions that you did. What is it that you were doing at that job? And then the combination resume is where you put your highlights of qualifications and functional information at the top, and then you add a shorter version of your work history at the bottom. So those are the basic types of resumes that I wanted to jump into. But before we get started, I want to make sure everybody understands that it's hard to teach a resume writing class to 100 people out there. because one size does not fit all. So if I'm coaching somebody in academia, their resume is going to be a curriculum vitae, and it's going to have their publications, and it's going to be multiple pages. It could be really, really long. If I'm career coaching somebody that's in the entertainment industry, they may have to have a resume that looks a little bit more like IMDb. They want to know, we want to put on there TV shows or movies or sitcoms or reels or what they've done. So it's really hard to teach a resume class because there's no one way to do a resume. Just like there's no two people alike and there's no two jobs alike, there's no two resumes that are alike. So in this program, I'm hoping to give you some food for thought. Hopefully shift your thinking about the way you think about resumes and give you kind of a broader perspective about what to do with your resume that'll help you in particular. So picking the right resume format is a big question. And the good news is that if you're going to upload your resume to a job posting, say on Indeed or Monster or Career Builder or Glassdoor or ZipRecruiter or the Muse or all of those down the right-hand side, you'll see that they've got their own formats. And so sometimes you don't get a choice about how you're uploading that resume. You're just trying to fit that in. And so picking the best format is really a personal choice. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an example of a couple different resumes and chat a little bit about them. So I chose my son, Nicholas. And I want you all to kind of just glance at that, because the reality is that it has to look nice. It has to look pretty. Back in the day, I used to tell people, print your resumes on bonded paper and then put them in an envelope so that when somebody pulls it out, they feel like they've got something substantial. Nowadays, we're just glancing at that resume. So what we want to look at is what pops out at us. I would not recommend putting your name in a fancy color, and we're going to talk a little bit about what fonts to use, but just glancing at a resume, we see that there's things in bold, there's things that are spaced, there's bullet points, there's sections, education, experience, skills, volunteer work. We can talk a little bit further in this class about what those different sections are, because that's where you get to be a little bit more creative. Speaking of creative, this is a resume for somebody that's a graphic designer. And so this is a very modern look to it because she's showcasing her skill set. And when you look at the skills section, she's also using really bright colors because she wants to promote what she can do. And she's got these little bars that show that she's really very, very good at Dreamweaver and Photoshop and Illustrator, but she's also got a little bit of experience with Premiere and Flash and JavaScript. So people that have a design or artistic background, they might want to showcase that on their resume. So this would be very appropriate in something that's graphic design, not so appropriate if you're trying to get a job in a corporate environment or a corporate office. Another example of this is a student who's got a lot of great experience, and he's got his professional skills on the bottom left, and he's gone ahead and put percentages in. So as an academic student, he's 90% confident in Photoshop and Illustrator, and maybe cinematography and Cinema 4D are also his areas of expertise. But many of you, as you look at this resume, you have to ask yourself, is this the look that I want to portray? What is the messaging? What do I want to highlight at the top? And at the top of this resume, at the very, very top, is the contact information and maybe a title, a name, a title, a website, an email. What's missing on this one's a phone number. That caught my attention. And then to the left, things like Instagram, LinkedIn, and websites. So there's lots of different styles that we can do. One of my favorite tricks to teach all of you is that you can Google images for resumes, and you can just take a look and see all these different resumes that are out there. And then you can click on whether it's a professional resume or a really simple resume, or if you're a student, you can kind of go online. And one of the easiest things to do is to say images for resumes to give you kind of a ballpark feel for what they should look like. Because the resumes really are your marketing piece. They're presenting who you are and what you want to look like. So I want to go ahead and give you guys a minute to really think about, where do you want your resume to go? What is it that you want your resume to capture? Because if you begin with the end in mind, it might help you as you're putting your resume together. you think about who is it that I want to give this resume to? Because the purpose of giving them a resume is hopefully that they'll bring you in for an interview. So I'll go back to what I call Career Coaching 101, which is the basics about what you need in order to get a job. And what you need in order to get a job is what you need in order to put together a resume, which is thinking about things like, what is it that I already know how to do? What is my knowledge? More so digging in, focusing. What is it you really, really like? What is it that you want to do? Because whose choice is it where you go to work? It's yours. And whose choice is it where you send a resume? It's yours. And so you have to really ask yourself, what are those things I know how to do, I like to do, and what is it that I trust I really, really want to do? As I start thinking about putting together my marketing piece, my resume, what am I going to put on that resume? So this is where I like to help my clients kind of dig in and be really unique, because we want your resume to be a reflection of who you are. We want it to spark curiosity in the person who's reading it, who says, oh my gosh, this is a really interesting person that I'd like to get to know. This person's so interesting, I'd like to interview them and see if I like them. And I really want to look through this resume to see if I trust them. Because nobody's going to hire you unless they have an opportunity to get to know you and start to like you and trust you. So let's start to dig in a little bit. And feel free to put comments or agreements in the chat. And if you've got questions in the chat, I know Oleg is going to cover some of those questions. So let me quickly get you thinking about this process of gathering your thoughts for what you're going to put on your resume. And I'm going to go with one more slide and then we'll take a little break. So your resume is a reflection of who you are. So the most important stuff is at the very, very top, who you are. You want to start with a heading and you want to make sure you've got your name, your email. Hopefully you have an appropriate email. We don't want anything like crazy girl Julie@gmail.com. Try to get your name coordinated for your resume. Telephone numbers. We're no longer requiring an address unless you think that it's a reflection of maybe a position that you want somebody to know you live in Los Angeles and the job is in Los Angeles. Some people are just putting down a cell phone and an email and a LinkedIn right at the top. That's the very, very basic stuff at the very, very top. Your name, your phone number, your contact information. Make sure your voice message connects to that. So when somebody calls you, when they look at your resume, all that at the top. But more importantly, your knowledge. Start to think about what it is you already know, whether that's a skill that you have or some specific education. I don't usually recommend people put their high school on unless they're a recent college grad or they're applying to a job where somebody went to the same high school they did and they're customizing their resume for that person and they want to connect that they're a Loyola High School alumni or some such thing. And knowing what you know can also be training that you've gotten, certificates that you've gotten, any diplomas that you've gotten. If some of you have been taking online classes, I have some clients that are taking IDEO courses, they're taking Microsoft Word courses, they're taking classes online. That knowledge, that training can also be put on the resume because resumes are a showcase for what you know. They're also a showcase for what you like. And this is where you can have a lot of fun asking yourself to think about what are some of your success stories? What are some stories that you can tease somebody with by listing some accomplishments on your resume or some experiences? Or maybe the people that you've worked with might go on the resume with respect to if you were in sales and you were calling on people like Clorox or Disney or Warner Brothers. Or if you worked with attorneys, or if you worked with lawyers, we want to know what people did you work with. And sometimes we can put that into a bullet point, and we can also highlight the parts of the job that interest you the most. There's not enough room on a resume to put everything you did at every job. And for some clients, one of my tricks in helping them with their resumes is I ask them to read through their resume and take off the things they don't like. So if part of my job as a career coach is helping people with salary negotiation, which I love to do, I'm going to make sure that's at the top of the resume. If part of my work is helping people with contract negotiations and I'm not that interested in contract negotiations, I don't want to leave that on my resume. I only want to put the things that I really like to do and want to do in the future on my resume, because those are the things that interest me. And then we also want to make sure that we cover the things that are the core values or the personal traits or maybe some hobbies or something on the resume that lets people know they can trust us. So when somebody says to me, well, I don't know if I should put down that I do volunteer work, my thought is that of interest to the person reading your resume? Do you think they'll trust you more if they see that you're volunteering? Or do you think they'll trust you more if they see that you're an athlete, if they see that you're a competitive swimmer or that you're a craft person? You know, go ahead and think about the things that are personal to you that you can add. Back in the day, I used to say, don't talk about religion or politics. And I'm going to tell you in 2021, that's a tough one because we are challenged with those sorts of things. So take a look at that resume and think about the audience that's reading it and ask yourself, do I trust that this is the best thing to put on my resume? So that's the kind of overview that I like to give clients when I talk about resumes. And one of the early questions that I saw in the chat was a little bit about, do we really still need a resume if we've got LinkedIn? And the answer is yes. LinkedIn is your standard, generic, who I am, who I'm connected to, because actually the number one most effective way to get a job is not a resume. The number one most effective way to get a job is through your connections, your network. So LinkedIn does a great job of connecting you to old coworkers, colleagues, old bosses, old classmates, and you put little notes in with your bullet points on LinkedIn to showcase who you are on LinkedIn. But when you really identify a place you want to work, then you want to submit a resume. And you want to customize that resume to fit the job that you're sending it to, so that they know you've taken the time and energy to match up what's in the job description with what's in the resume. So I want to go ahead and leave you guys with that thought and check in with Oleg and see, do we have any questions so far? Because I know I jumped into this, I hit the ground running, and we're going really quickly. So Oleg,
We
any
absolutely
questions?
do. Liz, thank you for pausing. We absolutely do have questions, and they were slow to start. They're now starting to come in, which I love. So let's start with one that you were just talking about. And by the way, the idea of putting the things that you like on your resume, that's actually new to me. I never even thought about that. Things that you like to do, that's really good advice. So we were just talking about LinkedIn. So somebody had asked actually very early in the program, in the age of LinkedIn, what purpose does the resume or CV now serve, and what form should it take to avoid being redundant, since many online applications now ask for your LinkedIn profile link as well as a resume and cover letter?
Right, absolutely. So the thing is that resumes are different than LinkedIn because they're a marketing piece. So we want them to look really, really nice, and we want them to be customized. LinkedIn kind of forces you into the platforms that they have. And statistically, people are going to glance at the resume, they're going to glance at the LinkedIn. So you want keywords and things to pop out. And this ties a little bit into what I was going to talk about with the applicant tracking system. LinkedIn is kind of what I call a passive job search, in that you can upload a lot of great information on LinkedIn, and then you can hope and cross your fingers and sit back and wait for recruiters or interview applicant tracking systems to find you based on keywords. So you can actually fill LinkedIn with lots of keywords at the top. You can fill in a little bio or a description about yourself, and you can kind of populate. And there is no 10-year limit on LinkedIn. You can go as deep as you want with your experience. With the resume, you want the resume to stand out as being customized for who you're creating that resume for and who you're sending it to. And I always like to tell clients to put a cover letter on top of the resume that also highlights why you're reaching out. And so I think we're still going to have resumes. The other big thing about resumes and cover letters Is there a trust factor? They're a little bit of what I call a writing sample. So they might see you on LinkedIn, but they don't trust you until they get that resume. And then they're going to compare the resume to the LinkedIn to see if it's a match, to see if it looks like this right person. So there definitely is a need still for resumes. Any other questions, Oleg?
Yes, absolutely. So here's kind of an easy one, but I think one that many people think about. Do you have any suggested fonts for a resume?
Suggested what?
Suggested fonts.
Oh, yes. I think I even have a slide on that. Why don't we hold that question and I'm going to get to that. Is there any other questions before I keep going?
Yes. So let me get some of those here. So actually, we talked about this before. We talked about this yesterday, actually. The big question, information, work gaps. So if somebody has so here's a specific question. What are your recommendations for handling a 15-year gap? In 2009, this questioner started a second master's degree and they're going to graduate in May. So how might they limit a negative impression that that 15-year gap might create?
Oh, I have a whole slide on gaps, but I guess I can take a gap in my program and jump in and answer that now. The gaps definitely need to be explained. And so it's a curiosity of, well, what have you been doing? Have you been a domestic engineer, which I think is a very fun name for being at home with kids. And so sometimes I tell my clients, get creative with what you were doing. If you were coaching your kids' little league or coaching soccer, or if you were taking care of an elderly parent, or if you went back to school and you were pursuing a dissertation, or if you started doing Etsy crafts online. It's about explaining who you are and what you've been up to. And so for many of us, we don't want to put a big gap. We want to go ahead and explain that and maybe not do a chronological resume, but do more of a functional resume. One that can do a highlights of qualifications at the top and then minimize the work experience at the bottom, and then maybe fill in with volunteer jobs. And the tricky thing about a resume is that a resume is not a legally binding document. The resume's purpose is to get you the interview where you can then explain yourself. So if you've put on the resume that you're working for the American Red Cross, and what that means is that you're helping with the blood drives, you get an opportunity to explain what you were doing at the blood drives and explain that you were doing it as a volunteer. But it's on the resume because you've got skills from doing that. You were organizing people, you were doing registrations, you were donating 2 pints a month for 15 years. I'm curious about what you've been doing, so be creative about answering those questions. It's a great question, though.
So there's a few questions, Liz, about how necessary a LinkedIn profile is. I mean, is it okay to just have just a resume, just a LinkedIn profile? You know, if somebody doesn't have social media or doesn't want to have be involved in social media, for example.
I agree. I do not think that LinkedIn is for everyone. I coach lots and lots of different clients. I coach a lot of service professional clients, clients that want to start their own snowblowing business, and they want to start their own repair handyman business. They're not on LinkedIn. That's not how they get business. I also work with a lot of entertainment people. They are directors and producers and actors and actresses. They don't want to be on LinkedIn. They just don't want people flooding them with information. I work with lawyers who don't want their constituents finding them. So LinkedIn is not for everyone. I think that anybody that's internet savvy, technology based, freelance, wants to market themselves, possibly should have that. But I also coach a lot of clients that say their audience is not on LinkedIn. They're better served to be on Instagram. They're better served to be on Twitter. They're better served somewhere else. I also work with clients that want to work for government agencies and government jobs, and they don't feel a need to have a LinkedIn. And if you've been working for 30 or 40 years, you may not have a LinkedIn because it's never been on your to-do list. So LinkedIn is not for everyone.
All right, and one more LinkedIn question. Maybe we'll do one more LinkedIn question, then we'll do one more question, and then we'll move on, because I know some of the things that are being asked you're going to cover. So
Okay.
And I think you talked about this a little bit earlier. Should the resume match the LinkedIn page? I mean, what differences are okay to have?
That's a great question because 2021, we are now in what I coach my clients to understand is a bit of an Uber economy where you might have a side hustle. You might be working 2 jobs or 3 jobs or more jobs. And so you might have kind of what I call a split personality where you're a business coach or a life coach on the side, but you're also still doing accounting and bookkeeping. So the curiosity is how do you put those two together? And it does take a little bit of a technique or a finesse on that. But certainly when I coach my clients to write resumes, I give you another one of my Lizisms, never make more than 1 copy of your resume at a time. You do not need to be having 100 copies of a resume, unless, of course, the job you're looking for, you're going to physically go walk around the warehouse district of downtown LA and drop off resumes that are all the same resume for the same type of work. But they're really, even if it's restaurants or warehouse, there's a difference. And you may want to customize each of those resumes. And so, having a blanket resume that says the same thing, the employer is going to look at that and they're going to say, why do they want to work here? Do they even know what we do? Do they even know about our company, our industry? What shows, how can we show people that we're unique and that we want that one job?
All right. So let me do one more question, and then we're gonna let you move on because I know there's a lot more to cover, and it's all great stuff. So just not a question, but I just want to let people know out there that we are actually going to be having a presentation about LinkedIn coming up in a couple of weeks. So I know you have a lot of LinkedIn questions today, but if you don't mind holding them off until March 9th at 7 o'clock, we're going to have a Get Going with LinkedIn, and you can register for that at the Work Ready page. So, we'll post a link to that a little bit later. So the final question before I let you move on is you've covered this a little bit already. I think you've mentioned this a few times. So in terms of volunteer work, uh, what kind of certificates, if somebody got an award from volunteering, if does it have to be related to the job posting? I mean, when is it good to include the volunteering?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head because the number one thing that you're looking for is the number one thing employers are looking for. And it's really simple. And I'll give you guys this as a tip. It's all about the fit. So if you're looking for a job and you can take a look at the job description and match it up with what you want to do, you're going to prove that you're a really good fit for that job. So having a certificate or a diploma or an award, you kind of want to tie that back to, is that of interest to them? I'm a huge fan of awards, and I think you should mention those awards and those accolades. And so if you got, employee of the month for, being able to explain it when you get to an interview is where it's really going to be important. But absolutely, a resume is a time to shine. It's your brag sheet. It's your marketing piece of these are my accomplishments. This is what I've done. So I would say putting on those certificates and those awards is very, very important. And hopefully the person reading your resume is curious about those awards enough to bring you in for an interview. So I would say this is the time to shine.
Awesome, awesome. I know people out there have done a lot of community service, especially if you're just getting started in a position. So there's other questions, but we'll hold them off and go ahead and go on with the presentation, and we'll stop a little bit later and for more questions.
Sounds great. So I just want to kind of recap that there's definitely sections to resumes. And so when you think about the beginning, you kind of want to ask yourself, okay, what's my objective? And should I put an objective on my resume? And the answer is, if you've got a specific goal that you want, like you want to be a management consultant for a Fortune 500 company, you might put that down as an objective if you're sending it to a recruiter. Or if you're sending it into a temp agency, you want to let them know, this is my objective. This is what I want to do, because then the recruiter or the temp agency knows where to place you. It's also quite a good idea to put a summary at the top, because statistically, people are going to read these resumes for such a short amount of time, they may stop reading after that first paragraph. So if you can do something at the top that's a highlights of qualifications or executive summary, you'll be able to say something along the lines of over 10 years experience in medical sales with 54, you're going to want to tell them the highlights of who you are right at the very, very top. So whether you call it a summary or a highlights of qualification, or in the functional resume, you may go ahead and categorize the different things that you can do, management, leadership, and maybe spotlight the ones that you really want to rise to the top. The second section is education or skills. And when I say skills, it's sort of like if you want to highlight what some of those skills are, some people like to put it like in block format. So they've got different columns so that when you look at the resume, it's kind of easy for somebody to very quickly take a look at it. Education should be relevant. If you are a recent college grad, you don't have a lot of work experience, you might want to go ahead and put specific coursework, some of the favorite classes that you took, or your GPA. But once you've been out of college for a while, you drop the GPA, you drop the coursework. Some people I know, what they studied in college has nothing to do with what they're doing in the real world. So they, what I call, bury the education. They put it down there at the bottom. If the job description requires that you have a bachelor's degree, you might want to put it at the top, or a master's degree, you put it at the top because you want to highlight that it matches up with what they're looking for. And then absolutely your experience. And this is where I coach my clients to really think about the experiences they had. And one of my tricks, and I probably should have put this on the slide, is any opportunity to add dollars, percents, or numbers to a resume. Dollars, percents, and numbers we trust. So if your experience was managing 65 employees in 24 offices and raising $1.2 million and a 102% increase in sales volume, those numbers are going to pop out, especially if you're looking for something in sales. We want to know, did you hit your goal? We want to know, are you a $100,000 a year executive secretary? Or are you a $30,000 a year executive secretary? Were you managing accounts that were in the billions of dollars or $50 accounts? So were you supervising 7-year-olds or 87-year-olds? Somehow putting those numbers in with your experience makes it a little bit more concrete. The other interesting thing is that sometimes if you've got your resume in front of you, I tell my clients, just look at the first word of each sentence. And we don't want words like worked at or helped with. We want more confident words. And so I like to share action words. And these are alphabetical. And this is just the top of a document that has about 6 pages, because we want you to highlight your skill set, but also change it up. As I said, your resume is a little bit of a writing sample. So one of the biggest mistakes I get is when clients don't use powerful words. They just use the same thing, manage ... manage ... And I say to them, well, what's another word for managed? Could you say that you supervised or coordinated or allocated or appointed? Or what are the other key words that you can use? And the nice thing about bullet points is that you can rearrange them. So you can ask yourself, for this job, they're more interested in my consulting, so I should put that bullet point at the top. And then maybe move another bullet point further down. And you might even find, as you're doing a particular resume and you're customizing it, to save that resume, save as, and your last name, and then the job, so that you can keep track of which resumes you're sending to who, and that they see that you customized that resume. And you may even want to use their words. So if the job description says that they're looking for somebody who is able to do coordinating and able to do identifying and able to do reporting, you might look at your resume and you might be using a different word, but basically you were coordinating, or basically you were estimating. So use their words because they're going to see that it's a better fit. So you take the job description and you circle the key words in the job description. And then you look at your resume and you ask yourself, where can I put some of those key words from the job description into the resume so that I match them up? And that's one of the best tips that I give my clients, is to look through that job description. And statistically, this is something that's got a lot of research on it. Guys will apply for a job that they've only got maybe 50 or 60% of the qualifications for the job. And they'll say, oh, what the heck? I can probably figure that out. Whereas women, we kind of hold back and we try to find that perfect job, when in reality, there is no perfect job. And if we can do 50 to 60% of that job, we should highlight the 50 or 60% we can do, promote that on the resume, promote that with the cover letter, get in for the interview, and then try to sell ourselves and see if it's a good fit. Because actually, many companies will hire you because they've gotten to know you, they start to like you, and they trust that they can train you. Is this person ready to learn? Do they want to be here? Does that resume come across as something that they took the time and energy to write? And yet sometimes we're dealing with the internet. So this goes back to the question of the applicant tracking systems. And these are being used because some companies get deluges of applicants, and they just don't have the manpower or the eyeballs to look through hundreds of thousands of resumes. So they're going to put them through their computer tracking system. So a couple things to think about are these fonts: Times New Roman, Arial, and Courier. Those are the ones that the applicant tracking systems can see. Size, no smaller than about 14 to 12 is the size. However, if you're trying to fill up the resume, go ahead and make your headings a little bolder or a little bit larger, or move the sides in. Do what you need to do to make it look pretty. It's not easy, but if you've got a high school kid at home or someone who's on the computer a lot, ask for help. Get somebody to be a second set of eyes, to proofread, to make sure things are clear, to make things are crisp. The fonts are definitely going to weed you out if they can't sort through them with the applicant tracking systems. The other thing is that the sections need to be clear so the computers can sort them. So the sections that they can identify are education, work experience, and skills. Applicant tracking systems have a little more difficulty when you put in things like volunteer work. They don't know whether that's education or experience. So sometimes the section headings need to be consistent. The other thing we talked about, or I talked about already, is copying the words from the job description and then listing them or inserting them even 1 or 2 times, because then the applicant tracking system, when the numbers get put together and they're looking for someone with management experience, and they see management in your highlights of qualifications, and then they see managing in your experience, and then they see manager and management, all those words add up to points so that you score higher, and if you're out of 100, maybe you're going to be in the top 20. And LinkedIn does a really nice job of telling you, hey, you're this close to being comparable to this job description. And that's because they're doing their little technology applicant tracking systems. Acronyms should also be spelled out. If you're a CPA, you might want to put certified public accountant. If you've got your MD or your MA, you may want to spell out what those acronyms are, because the applicant tracking systems may or may not figure out what those acronyms are. So I always tell my clients, be careful to know your audience. And if you're online and you're applying for something and you're transitioning, say from hospitality, maybe you worked in hospitality and now you want to work at a hospital, you may want to figure out what words in hospitality are not familiar to somebody in a medical setting, and how do I correlate those? We call them guests. Somebody else calls them a patient, or a client is not a guest. So use the terminology and spell things out so that your applicant tracking system can make those connections. But that's one that I love to talk about, and I love to answer questions. So I'll pause there. Oleg, are there any other questions that have popped in?
Absolutely, Liz. We've had a lot of great questions. Actually, I want to answer. There's somebody had just asked, how long is this webinar? And I can answer that question. We're going to be running till about 8:15 today. So
that's a great question, because I'm throwing a
very important question. That's a very important question. So let me ask you this. We have a few questions from folks who are older, have had jobs for a really long time. If somebody went to college, decades ago, or got some kind of certificate decades ago, how do you feel about dates? Should they put the date that they went to school, or the dates that they had certain jobs? Is it necessary?
You know what? That's a great question. And I would say for college, drop the dates. Unless they're recent in the last 3 to 5 years, I think you should drop the date because discrimination is alive and well. And we do not want you to be discriminated upon based on dates. So that's why I say 10 years on a resume, if it's chronological. If it's functional, you can put the skills at the top and you don't have to put any dates. Sometimes you can put a highlights of qualifications, the work you did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. If you're still wanting to get back into that or do that, go ahead and put that in there. The other interesting thing to do is if you've worked at the same company, go back to what your job title was when you started and break out those job titles so that you can show promotions, so you can show advancement. So whether you went from assistant manager to manager, your job might have changed, and you can go ahead and put those changes in there and you can show progression. Even if it was the same job, you're adding what you've done.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a question that comes up a lot. Multiple job titles in the same company.
Yeah.
So, continuing with this topic, if somebody's worked 20 years, work has 20 years, you've said a few times, include 10 years on your resume. If that includes a couple of positions, or, if the person's been working, 30 or 40 years, how do you get all that information? Because if somebody has really a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge.
And sometimes I tell my clients, depending on the audience, you may want a longer resume. You may want to go ahead with a curriculum vitae if you're in academia, or if you really want somebody to understand the breadth of your experience. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll tell my clients, take your resume and try to have an informational interview with someone and ask for their advice. Say, this is the resume that I've put together. I'd like your information on it, or show it to a colleague or a coworker. And, it's not like you want to get advice from one person. I have a rule of 3. Try to get your resume looked at by 3 different people, because you're going to get 3 different opinions. But the person whose opinion matters most is the person you want to work for. So if you can find a hiring manager and share it with them, then you're going to get more valid information. Is this enough information on my resume? Is it too much? What do you think? Or find someone working at the company that you want to work at and maybe talk to them a little bit about that, what I call the $1 million question. What exactly is this company looking for? What are they going to care about on the resume? What do they not care about on the resume? And I have the belief that human nature is people want to figure out the best fit. They don't want to hire you if you're not right for the job. So going in there and actually asking someone or showing them a resume before you submit the resume, getting feedback on it, is a really good use of working through that resume, is to test it, to get it out there and show it to a few people.
That's an interesting point of view. It feels like a gutsy move, but I don't know if it is. I mean, when you say it, like the way that you say it, it's like, oh, that's just normal. It's a really good thing to do.
Yeah, it is definitely a paradigm shift. And that's something I enjoy doing when I'm with clients one-on-one, is that I ask them, what have they already tried? And then what can we push the envelope to make it even better? Because it is a paradigm shift. Most of my clients come to me and they say, I can't find a job. I've sent 100 resumes. And what I tell them is, statistically, you've got a 1 in 10 chance. So 100 resumes, you might get 1 interview. But if I can coach you to step out of your comfort zone and have 10 conversations, you're likely to get an interview. 100 resumes sent out might get you 1 interview, but 10 phone calls, 10 connections can get you more interviews. So the time and energy of sitting at home and sending out a lot of resumes, unless you're customizing those resumes and doing your homework on them, it's a little bit harder to get their attention. Yeah.
So work smarter, not harder.
Right.
So here's a question, and then we'll have maybe a couple more after this one, and then we'll continue the presentation. So
Sure.
I've been at my current job since 1989. Will that be held against me?
Oh, I don't know what the job was or what the industry was, but certainly we are now in an economy where things are moving so quickly. that it's no longer a negative to have a lot of different jobs, because the lifeline, or the life, I guess it is sort of the length of time at a job is becoming shorter and shorter, because companies are downsizing, mergers, acquisitions, takeovers, things like that. But then again, there's also people who, like a university professor who's worked at this, been a professor for 30 years. That's a lot of longevity. And in some industries, they want that. You're stable, you're secure. Hire me today, I'll be here tomorrow. I'm not a job hopper. So those are the things we want to highlight. If you've got a whole lot of work experience, you're pretty reliable and pretty dependable. And I think you should put that on the resume.
I think working in the same, yeah, that's a great run.
Yes, exactly. You're a survivor.
So actually, I think this might be my favorite question today, because I totally appreciate this person. Is it okay to state in a cover letter something generic like, I have a love for administrative work? Or is that too general? I'm trying to show my enthusiasm.
I think that it's as I love administrative work. I think putting the word love in a cover letter, I love, money crunching or something like that. I think it's your personality and it's who you are. And if they don't want that, then that may not be the right job for you either, because it is about the fit. So if they don't want someone who loves stuff, then that's not going to be the right fit. But you've got to have a little bit of fun to go in there and be who you are and showcase that you love it. So I would tell people, this is what I love to do. Yeah.
Thank you. So here's a question. What do you think of Indeed? Actually, I want to make this question bigger, because the person asked, what do you think of Indeed? And Indeed.com, as most people know, is one of the most popular job sites out there. So I'm going to make it a two-part question. What do you think of Indeed? And also, are there any job sites that you dissuade people from?
You know what? I worry when a lot of my clients are just on job sites going send, 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 because I'm concerned that those job sites are making it with marketing, hey, don't worry about a thing, just apply for online with our whatever website there is. When the truth of the matter is, job sites are, resumes don't get jobs, people do. Two people are eventually going to have a conversation. You rarely get hired without having a conversation. And nowadays it's on Zoom or over the phone. It may not be in person, but you still need to have that trust, and there still needs to eventually be a person behind it. So I think what's nice is that we now live in an information age where you should use those sites for research. You should be getting as much information as you can. All Indeed, Monster, all those that I listed, they all have tips on resumes, tips on getting a job. So how you conduct your job hunt is indicative of how you will be on the job. The more research you do, the smarter you are in preparing for the job hunt, the smarter you're going to be once you get that job. But to trust the system and the ATS to find you a job is a recipe for a disaster, because you're going to be waiting a really long time. So that's why I caution people, because there's a lot of scams out there. There's a lot of bad jobs out there. There's also a lot of jobs that are desperate to hire people because they're hard jobs. They're, whether that's working for the police department, that's a hard job. They've got to recruit somehow. There's a unique person that's going to be a good fit for that. And sales jobs that are 100% commission, those are hard jobs. So those companies are constantly hiring. So if you're constantly seeing the postings for those jobs, you've got to ask yourself, either they need to hire a lot of people and they can't find those people, or nobody wants that job. So looking at what's out there can really be good research on what the world of work is. Yeah.
Thanks, Liz. So we do have a lot of other questions, but I want to let you continue your presentation, and we're going to do our best to try to cover as many questions as possible towards the end of the presentation. And there's so many questions, and so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to kind of combine the questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer as many questions as possible.
Absolutely. And as I said, I could talk about this for a 4-hour program. So I know we had a lot of people asking about gaps in the resume, and we're all going to have a COVID gap, I would assume, because of something. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of us had to pivot. We had to, I know that my library presentations, I had 20 I think I had 23 libraries on schedule that I was going to drive to and do live presentations. And now those just wiped off my calendar. So there's a big gap. But what did I do? I pivoted to online. I don't consider myself a TV personality, and yet here I am on TV, and I'm going to be on YouTube. So who knew? So what did I have to do in order to get ready? I had to go back to school myself. I had to go back and ask myself, okay, a lot of people are going to be looking for careers, but it's not just careers I want to do, it's life coaching. So I filled the gap during COVID by going back to school myself and getting my life coaching certificate. And so that's going to show up on my resume. Some of the other activities that I did, I got very involved with some of the nonprofits that I work with. That's going to go on my resume. So when somebody says, what did you do during COVID? I'm going to be able to tell them, I did a lot of walking. I took care of I flew to Wisconsin. I took care of my family. It may not be printed on the resume, but I'm going to be putting it in a cover letter, or I'm going to be putting it somewhere so it fills in that gap. So somebody says, you know, we want to hear more. We want to bring her in and talk with her about it. Gaps are tricky, and yet I'm a big fan of honesty is the best policy. So if you can find a way to highlight what you have been doing and put that on the resume, it's a conversation starter. I want to make sure I covered a lot of these mistakes. So let's go back through. Typos and bad grammar. That's an immediate, you're out of the box. And 77% of that, one of the things I like to say is if you submit a resume somewhere for a job that you think you're a really good fit for, follow up. Call them up. Did they get your resume? Are you going to be considered for the position? If they say, oh, form letter, we went with a better qualified candidate, reach back out in 3 months. Here's one of my Lizisms. Most people will quit or get fired in the first 3 months. They'll take a job because they were desperate, and then they'll start working and go, what am I doing here? This job sucks. I don't want to be here. And they'll either quit or get fired. You, on the other hand, really wanted that job. You applied for it. You didn't get it. 3 months later, check in. You know, hey, human resource person, did you look at my resume? Just curious if that position was filled and maybe I can support you in another department, another division. Follow up, because maybe it was a typo. Maybe it was something grammatically incorrect on your resume and they didn't even interview you. For whatever reason, follow up. Unprofessional email address, I already mentioned that. The Joe Schmo beer drinker at gmail.com might not be the best way for people to get a hold of you. Make sure your voice message says, this is Liz Mohler, career coach, at the tone, leave a name and number, as opposed to some slang, hey, you got me, now catch me, now, you know, ring a bell. Not appropriate, not professional. Resumes without quantifiable results. That's a tricky one to talk about, but we want you to have those bullet points really sort of explain what you did at the company. Not that you just worked there, but what you did and how it made you a better person, or how you solved a problem, or something that's a result. But the next one over is we don't want a lot of long paragraphs. We don't want a lot of messaging that's superficial. We don't want you saying, I did this when I did that. It's not a personal letter, it's a resume. So we don't want a lot of long things that people are going to be dragged through, unless, of course, you're writing for a job as an editor of a newspaper, and then you really are writing a sample of your writing sample. So it could be different. That's why there's no right or wrong answers in resumes. There's no ultimatums. There's no one size fits all. And then the last one, this is the concern I have, is these generic resumes. Take the time to customize it to the company, which is easy to do if you have a job description. You take the words on the job description and you match them up with your resume so they show a fit. So I always want to make sure I cover that, because 40% of the hiring managers spend less than a minute reviewing your resume. Make it look pretty. Bold, fonts, sections, categories, dates, dollars, numbers, percents, so they can glance at it and go, this person behind this resume is probably neat, organized, efficient, looks good. That's what we want to see. It's really at a glance. And so we need to update resumes. We need to keep a master. We need to do a different resume for each job and then save it as name and company. Because what we want to make sure is that the job description Doesn't that look a lot like the resume? And I like this little cartoon because if they see that what's on your resume matches up with what's in the job, you're more likely to be considered a good fit. And there's lots of great resources out there. I love the California Career Zone. There's even a template to fill in to get you started on a resume. There's also myskillsmyfuture.org, which you can put in what jobs you used to have, and it'll match you up and give you suggestions on the terminology. And then, of course, there's always the Muse, which is a lot like Indeed with some interesting articles. And sometimes I tell my clients, ask yourself who else is doing what you do. Be curious and Google other people's resumes. Maybe even ask for people that work at companies to share with you the resume they sent to the company that got them the job. Because if you can find a path that somebody else has already been down and you can follow in their footsteps and match it up and show that you're a good fit, you might be able to modify your resume to look like the resumes that they've already accepted. And that's what the applicant tracking system is it's a model, it's a template. This is what we're looking for. And then they try to find the names to match it in. So I've got my contact information on here. I've got my cell phone, my email, my evaluation. I think Oleg is going to put that in the chat box, but I really do like the chats. So I'm going to stop sharing and
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Good
guys.
night.
Have a
Thank
great
you,
night.
Liz.
Thank you, Oleg. Good luck, everybody. Take care.